Welcome to Stories of Alberta's Military Service. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Retired Robert McKenzie, and with me today is Lieutenant Ian Parkinson, and our special guest today is WWII Roy Gale, a local Medicine Hat resident who is 97 years old and enlisted in the Second World War. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you.
First question I have, can you give us a wee bit of your early history? How did you get to Medicine Hat?
My father farmed in northern Saskatchewan, and farming didn't go well for him. He was held out, and he finally gave up, and we moved to the town of Melfort, where my dad was doing odd jobs. I was but a boy of 5 or 6 years old, and he got a job, finally got a job as a band administrator for the Citizens Band of Medicine Hat. Frank Novak was the bandmaster, and my dad became the administrator of the band. But there was no pay to that job. That was a volunteer job, and the band had promised they would find my dad a job, a steady day job, and if he would be the band administrator. So that's what he took on, and we moved to Medicine Hat, and he got a job in the Medalta potteries.
So what year was that? Around what, the late 20s?
That was in 1927.
Okay.
Yeah, 27 when he...
What did he do at Medalta Potteries? Various jobs, or?
Well, I have a story about that. I'm not sure. It probably was various jobs. But my favorite thing was that I went to, he'd forgotten his lunch one day or something, and I walked over with his lunch pail, and he was testing jugs. And these were the 1 gallon jugs with a sort of came to a neck with a cork in the top. He was testing jugs, and he had an air hose, and he would give a shot of air into each jug, and if it didn't explode, it was a good one.
that was a... So you grew up in the Medicine Hat area, but prior to World War II, you joined the South Alberta Regiment.
That's right, yes. I think in probably 1936. I joined the South Alberta, and it was one night a week, as far as I can remember. It was Thursday evenings. We went over to the armories and took a little bit of instruction on how to march, and we got as far as firing a .303 rifle. I'm not sure of the make of the rifle, whether it was a Ross or an Enfield, but just one night a week for a couple of hours. That was our training.
Okay, and that was the Army at the top of Division Avenue and 3rd Street.
That's right.
That's where it was.
Yes,
there.
Their armory there.
Okay, so you were a member of the SAR for about 4 years when war was declared.
Oh, I don't think it was that. I was being in it. Well, because I know I was working for Canard Transport, a trucking company, mostly during the summer, for 1 or 2 years. And we were away quite a bit. I don't know if my attendance was mandatory or not at the SAR, but I managed to stay with it.
Okay, so war was declared in 39, September 39.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to join the military?
Well, I was at this Start of it, I was out harvesting up near Drumheller, and and I stayed there. I told the farmer I worked for that I'd help him with the harvest for that year, and that's what I did. And finally, I got home, and in about probably October sometime, and I got on with Eaton's, and I worked for them for part of the winter, or for most of the winter. And then I decided that I should join the Army. I had a lot of friends that had gone into the Calgary Islanders, and I'd like to join them. So they came down to Medicine Hat on a recruiting mission, and I joined them.
Okay, so you signed up in early 1940.
Yes.
And then where did you go? You signed up. What happened after?
Well, we went up to Calgary by train, and before I did it, we didn't have any uniforms. There were no uniforms available at the time. They gave us just some fatigue clothes. And anyway, a day or two, or shortly after I arrived there, they called me over, and I had put down on my papers that I was a clerk. So they called me into the office and told me that's where I should work. Or that's where they wanted me. So I became a clerk.
So you were a clerk at Eaton's that was selling, you were selling things.
I was selling in the menswear department.
So you ended up, and because you put down clerk, you ended up as somebody working in the oiler room managing paper.
That's right.
That's funny how stories work. Okay, what happened? You took your training, you went up to Mowat Armories in Calgary. Where did the Calgary Hunters go from there?
From there, we were shipped in late in May to Camp Shiloh in Manitoba, where they were to undergo intensive training, probably, as we call it. And we were there for 3 months, all through the hot, blistering summer out on near Brandon. Mm-hmm. And eventually we were loaded aboard a train and shipped down east to eastern Canada, headed for overseas. Mm-hmm. We didn't really know where we were going or anything else other than we were going east and, and headed for England.
But you had an interesting story about the ship that took you over to England with the Calgary Highlanders, and a few other units went over with...
yeah, that's some smaller units,
yeah.
Yes.
So it was the Louis Pasteur, which was a French cruise liner.
That's right, yes. And it had was still a passenger ship. It hadn't been converted to a military ship. They loaded us all on. There were two bunk, or a bunk, an extra bunk in each stateroom, and one of the lounges at least had a large number of bunk beds.
Just put up.
Just put up in there, and that's as close as it came to being an actual troop ship, as it was.
But you had civilian stewards and everything, and
we had stewards, and
your beds were made every morning. And
well, I'm not sure about making the beds, but we had pretty good service there. It served very good meals, nice, fancy.
Linen.
Utensils and linen and dining room service. It was very good.
You were still working as a clerk. You hadn't received much training military training, because you were working in the oiler room most of the time.
That's right, yes.
So you arrived in England. What happened once the Calgary Highlanders arrived in England?
Well, we were immediately marched off the ship onto a train. This is at Gourock, which is just out of Glasgow. And the train took us directly down to Aldershot. It was an overnight trip, as far as I can recall. But the first night we were there, we also, there was an air raid warning. This was on the night of September the 6th, I believe, of 1940, and one of the first air raids over London. And there was an air raid warning, and that night there was a single bomb dropped down on our barracks and hit the kitchen. I can't recall if there was any casualties from it. It was late at night, but apparently what it was a plane that had been on the bombing of London and was going back to Germany and had an extra bomb, and they just dropped it as they went along. But that was within a couple of 300 yards of our barracks. And that was it.
Oh, so the kitchen for your particular area was wiped out, and that was the only thing that happened.
That's right, yes. Well, that one. But,
that was fortuitous.
Yes.
Okay, you were still working in the oiler room, but what was a unit doing at that particular time? They arrived in Aldershot, undertook more training, and then they...
it was probably they were out in the field training for 2 or 3 months. It was fairly close to Christmas when they were sent down the whole unit was sent down to Hove, which is a town near Brighton. And
that's on the coast.
Down on the coast, on the south coast. And they were put on guard duty there for to watch for any invasion or signs of any invasion coming towards England. And it was a very real threat at that time, because Germany had wiped out Europe practically, and it was a very real threat that the Germans were going to come over and tackle England.
So this is Christmas time of 1940, leading into the year of 1941.
Yes.
Okay. So how long was your battalion or regiment on sea guard duty?
Well, they were on for 2 or 3 months at a time.
Okay.
And then they were sent back to Aldershot and did more training, and one thing and another. And after 2 or 3 months, they were sent back down to different places along the coast of England. And we were in, one time or another, from Brighton to Hove. There was Bexhill-on-Sea, Eastbourne.
Yep.
And I think going the other way from Brighton, I think there was a town called Bognor Regis.
Yep.
And that was as far west as we went. And I think Bexhill was probably as far east. Bexhill. There was a town called Battle, where the Battle of Hastings took place.
1066.
1066, yes.
So you got, but all this time, you weren't out in the guard duty, you were working in the oiler room because you were a clerk.
That's right, yes.
And it's interesting, it takes so much to operate a battalion, so much paperwork.
Yes.
And it hasn't got any easier. In fact, it's probably got a lot worse managing that.
Well, I noticed that despite the fact that in life and that I had a little business of my own, but everything was supposed to make less paperwork as the computers came in, but it seems that it increased the amount of paperwork. It was, you know, when I was a clerk, if we had to make 5 or 6 copies of one letter, we'd do it on what we called onion skin paper and carbon paper, and we would type. The bottom copies were sometimes not too bright,
Not very legible.
but now they can make very good copies on the computer, and they do make thousands, and they don't save any paper. They use.
No. But so from 41 to 43, the regiment was doing this 3 months, 2-3 months down at the coast, 2-3 months back at training, and they were
That's right.
doing that. And this was sort of the holding in England.
That's right.
And during that time, you had an opportunity to go on a course to find out how to do what you had been doing for a couple years.
That's right. Yes.
And you went on a clerk's course to London.
That's right.
What did, was that one of the first times you went into London?
No, I'd been there several times. I had an aunt and uncle who lived in London, and I visited them. It was my mother's sister and her husband, and I'd been to London
A few times.
a few times.
What did you learn from your clerk's course? Do you remember offhand?
Well, I practiced up on typing more than anything, typing in shorthand, and became quite proficient at that.
So you passed your clerk's course,
Yes.
came back.
Well, I passed, and I was recommended for headquarters duty.
Oh,
So that was.
and did that recommendation have any effect on your military service?
Well, it did to the effect that I was, after Dieppe, General Roberts gave me the job because I was efficient at typing, and
So you worked in, and General Roberts was in 2nd Div headquarters.
yes,
And he was responsible for writing up the citations for medals
yes,
after the Dieppe raid.
that's right.
And
yes.
you were involved in making sure that the final product that went out was acceptable.
That's right, yes.
Okay. And gathering all the information on, taking all the information that had been submitted and writing up the citations and that.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Hey, and then what happened after the citations for the Dieppe raid got done and you were in the 2nd Div headquarters? What happened after that with your career?
I was sent to a holding unit and just sat around for 2 or 3 weeks and did nothing, had no specific duties or anything. And the holding unit, well, it was kind of a basic place for replacements. And this 5th Div support group were requiring a clerk in their office to replace a sergeant that had been promoted somewhere or found a better.
Were you still wearing Calgary Highlanders accoutrements then?
I was still wearing Calgary Highlanders badges
Okay.
and tam o' shanter.
Yeah. So you went to the 5th Div
Yes,
headquarters.
5th Div, well, it's the support group. It contained 2 or 3 units of artillery, 4th Anti-Tank Regiment, 8th, 17th Field Regiment, 5th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment, an ambulance corps, and
So it was all the units that supported the
division,
the
Infantry.
fighting troops.
the fighting troops.
Although
That's right, yeah.
artillery is part of the combat arms, but the ambulance, the supply, anti-tank,
Okay,
anti-aircraft, yeah. Okay. And so you were working there. Any particular stories you remember that sort of come to mind on that?
Well, I was yeah, they reorganized the whole division,
Yeah.
probably at the time. And instead of calling it the support group, they just called it the artillery, 5th of Artillery. And the ambulance and the Army Service Corps and those people, they were more independent of the brigade headquarters. And the artillery was pretty well the same as a brigade headquarters. It was the artillery brigade. And that transition kind of resulted that they required me to be an artilleryman, that I wear the uniform, you know, wear the badges of the...
So that's when you rebadged to the artillery.
That's when I left the Calgary Highlanders permanently and became part of the 5th Division.
And what was your rank at that time?
Corporal.
Okay.
I was a corporal in the Calgary Highlanders.
And so you went into the artillery as a corporal, still working in the divisional headquarters.
Yes, as a corporal. But I was doing the job of the sergeant major who had been transferred out, or not the sergeant major, the staff sergeant. And I was doing his job. And the setup of the unit required a staff sergeant do there, so that's why I worked. And in 3 easy hops, I became a staff sergeant from corporal.
How long did that take you to get from corporal to staff sergeant?
About 4 or 5 months.
Well, that is...
Maybe 6 months.
That is one of the fastest ones I've heard of.
It was pretty bad. The
But
first,
obviously recognizing your stellar performance.
well, that's,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was that or what, but
Now, then 5th Division, they were involved in Italy, weren't they?
that's right. The 5th Division was shipped down to Italy. We went from Liverpool. It seemed to us as on the ship at the time that we were going west from Liverpool. And we sailed day after day going west, and all of a sudden made a about face and went back east again and got into the Bay of Biscay. And there were some terrible storms there. And but anyway, we were in a convoy of 50 or 60 ships. But riding alongside our ship, which was a fair-sized ship, was a little freighter, and it was going up the waves, balancing on top, down it'd go out of sight, and up again. And we could see the fellows on that ship were hanging over the rail. We were close enough that we could see this. And kind of felt sorry for him, I guess, because our ship was riding fairly stable. Anyway, that evening we got into Gibraltar and went through the Strait of Gibraltar. And that night we experienced the first air raid that I had been in at sea. I'd been in several in London and previously, but this was at sea. Our orders were stay in your room. And we could hear the Orlican guns firing over us, and we could the bigger guns. But it's quite scary just to be sitting there and wondering what's going to happen. And you couldn't look out, you couldn't let any light out, of course. So that night there was a nursing ship that got hit. And the captain ran it aground in the north of Africa, so it wouldn't sink. There were some nurses injured on that, but we came across those nurses later on, and it had been quite an experience for them to be in a ship that was in danger of sinking, had been hit. And that. But we went direct to Naples Harbor from there. So,
and where's Naples? In Sicily?
No, it's in Italy. In Italy itself.
Oh, okay.
The Sicilian campaign was over by then. They had taken over Sicily, the Allies, and we were marched off the ship and onto halfway up a mountain on the east side of Naples.
Now, you said you didn't take much of your equipment over.
No, we had no equipment.
Yeah, or very little.
Well, very little.
Yeah.
We had our did artillerymen. We didn't even have a rifle. But there was the Cape Breton Highlanders went over at that time. They were in the 5th Div. As an infantry unit, so they must have had them, but very little equipment. We landed there and we marched to a town of Afragola, 4 or 5 miles out of Naples, but up on the side of a mountain, sort of. And that evening there was a big air raid on all the shipping that was in Naples Harbor, and that was from where we were sitting. We had a bird's eye view of all the aircraft firing at the airplanes and the searchlights flying, and that was a fireworks display that I've never seen before or since. That was and the little displays they put on at the Stampede and things like that, to me it's peanuts compared to what we saw that night.
That was quite impressive. But you were supposed to receive your equipment for the whole regiment from the British.
That's right.
And so you... can you tell us about that?
Well,
what arrived?
We went down to the south. We were stationed at a what was the name of the town? It slips me. But we were stationed around. It was not fairly far south in Italy, and it was quite for the first winter, it was a terrible winter that we were down there. It snowed and rained and rained and rained, and it became completely bogged down. But
But the equipment that you got wasn't in the best of shape.
And the equipment wasn't in the best of shape, and it took us 4 or 5 months before we got something that was battle-worthy, put it that way.
So what time of year was this?
Well, by then it was like we went to Italy in September, and this would be in November, December, and January.
Of 42, 43?
42 and 43, yes.
Well, 40.
But
No, that was that would be 44.
oh,
wouldn't it?
maybe it was.
Going
yes.
into 44.
Eventually, we got some of the Canadians were battling the Germans at Ortona. My brother was involved in that, and our artillery was also involved with that, but not our infantry. And then after that, we were moved over to the west side of Italy to the area of Cassino. And the Cassino was a monastery on top of a hill, and just partway down the mountain was the town of Cassino. And below that was the Leary Valley. And we were shipped into the Leary Valley. And there was a big push on for that, and the 50th was down in the Leary Valley. Other Canadian divisions were up in the mountains, parts of the 8th Army. And there was a Polish army that got heavily involved in the Cassino itself, the fortress, or the monastery, taken over the monastery. The monastery controlled the Leary Valley. It was visible, the whole Leary Valley was visible below that, and with the German binoculars and that, nothing could move in the Leary Valley during daylight hours. Everything had to be moved up at night, and it was heavily fortified. The Germans had pillboxes all over the place. And
Was this prior to the big assault on, or during the big assault on Monte Cassino?
well, that was pretty well the same time. There was several battles for the Monte Cassino, but it was during that time when it was finally wrested from German hands and put into Allied hands. And
Well, there was a lot of bombing took place then, and a lot of artillery.
a lot of artillery action. And we've moved up to Rome, and there's also a story about the fall of Rome that we were involved in. Excuse me. And what had happened, we were driving through Rome, and around by the Colosseum, the main road through Rome took you right by the Colosseum, but there was a sniper, a lone German sniper, started shooting at the column of vehicles coming into Rome, and he was from a 5 or 6 story building. And this guy started shooting. Well, normally the commander would have called on the artillery to blow the building down, and that would have been it. But this being Rome, it was
there were limitations.
There were limitations. We weren't allowed to do anything like that. So this one sniper held the whole column of troops, and it was a long column, of troops, practically the whole 5th Division. And they held them up with one sniper, one guy up in the building. And they had to finally call in infantry units to
Clear the building.
clear the building and get them out of there before we could advance again.
So you went through Rome, and then where did you end up after that operation?
We went over to the east side again, north of Ortona. Rimini was one, to recall them, and we ended up at Ravenna, which is a town on the coast, well, not right on, but close to the coast, and not very far from Venice, actually. So that's where we spent that winter of '44 there.
So you've seen most of the tourist spots in Italy for free.
We saw the tourist spots. They weren't very tourism-minded at the time. But yes, we saw Salerno, Sorrento, and Naples, and Rome, and we saw Florence. We drove right through Florence, and Ravenna was prior to the war was a town of artists. But it was very nice, and the people were very nice. But we had our own quarters. We just took over buildings and hosted whoever lived there, and we took over, things like that.
Yeah.
So you're in Ravenna in the winter of 1944. What happened after that?
Immediately after, well, even before winter was over, we were, the powers that be, put it that way, decided the Canadian Corps should fight as one unit. They had, 1st Canadian Corps was in Italy, and the 2nd Canadian Corps was in Europe.
Okay.
And so the decision was made that the 1st Canadian Corps would fight as one unit in Europe. So we were shipped from Italy to Europe at that time. We left the port of Leghorn and sailed across the Mediterranean, or through the Mediterranean, to Marseille in the south of France.
And that was after D-Day, right?
That was, oh yes, that was after D-Day. We had...
was that in about September 45 or 44?
No, I think it was earlier.
No, okay.
Earlier.
Well, D-Day was in June.
Oh yeah. Well, this might have been 45 then.
Okay.
That we right in the winter of 45. And we drove through with our equipment, all our trucks and everything. By that time, we had got them in pretty good shape, and we drove from Marseille up through Dijon and Lyons. I may not be saying these quite right. And we crossed the Nijmegen Bridge, or the where the Nijmegen Bridge had been over the Rhine. And we were into the Europe battlefields, put it that way.
So you've come through Holland. When did you get into Germany? You come across the Nijmegen Bridge
Well,
over the Rhine.
Yeah. The war was practically over. We did get into a little bit of Germany. Went through what was called the Hochwald Forest.
Yep.
That was sort of between Apeldoorn, which was Holland. We had been around there, Arnhem, and Groningen, which was in the northwest, is where we ended. The war was over when we got into there.
Okay. And so your time in Europe was quite not, there weren't a lot of battles taking place.
Well, no, not really. The Battle of the Bulge had already taken place when we got there. We got into the town of Arnhem, and it was still being shelled by the Germans, but they had been chased out. And anyway, it was within a couple of months and the war was all over.
Yeah. Okay, now, the war was over at that particular time. I mean, the hostilities ceased in Europe.
Yes.
What did you do at that particular time? I mean, as a clerk, what was your, you were trying to get your people out of there?
We were busy trying, well, what I think of more than anything as a clerk was nominal rolls, which was the rolls of units and keeping them up to date. The personnel was changing, people were
leaving, coming.
Were leaving and coming and that.
What was your rank at that time, Roy?
Staff sergeant.
Staff sergeant.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you get promoted to sergeant major and then WO1?
Well, that was at just at the end of the war, because the WO1 sergeant major at 1st Div Artillery Headquarters was repatriated on the time of his service in Europe, and I was asked if I would take his job on.
So did you skip the sergeant major position too?
No,
and go straight to WO1?
Well, yes, I did. I went straight from staff sergeant to WO1, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so part of your job was to get the people back, and that, when did you arrive back in Canada?
I didn't get back until just before Christmas.
Just before
45.
Christmas of 45?
Yes.
Okay.
So I had missed 5 Christmases at home.
What do you remember about you came back in a ship?
I came back on the Queen Mary.
Oh,
Yeah.
but that was a troop ship then.
But that was a troop ship, and it. I have seen the records of that, the logbooks of the Queen Mary from at that time, and on the particular voyage that I was on it, they carried 12,000 soldiers back to Canada, or back to America.
Right.
We landed in New York Harbor.
Oh.
And
And then, now the Queen Mary was so fast that they let it go by itself, didn't they?
That's
You weren't
right.
in a convoy.
No.
They just got out and went because it was one of the fastest ships afloat at that time.
It was, yes.
How long was your trip back from England?
Well, about
to-
4 days.
About 4 days, which was
Yeah. We were, and then they kept us on the boat for 3 days before they
Let you off.
before there were so many trains and coming for soldiers to
So you loaded on the train in New York and went up to Canada?
yes, but it was 3 days after we docked before we got on the train, and then we went straight up to Canada, through Niagara Falls, and west to Winnipeg, and on from there to
Calgary.
the train went to Calgary, but I got off at Medicine Hat.
Oh, so you had you got off at Medicine Hat and had a little holiday, and then what happened there?
Well, I must have went back to Calgary at some point,
And got released from the military.
but it was into January of 45,
46?
46.
That'd be 46 then.
Yeah.
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 And so you got to Medicine Hat. What do you remember about arriving in Medicine Hat after being away for 5 years?
Well, the biggest change in Medicine Hat was the Assiniboia Hotel had burnt down. The old Assiniboia Hotel on 3rd Street. And it was still a big black
Smoldering ruin.
ruin there. Yeah.
So you got back in Medicine Hat in after you got out of the army, went to Calgary, got out, and then what did you do then to get your life back on track?
Well, I stayed for a while with my parents at home, and then I decided I didn't want to work for anybody. I was going to be my own boss. And I looked around, I almost had gone into the trucking business and bought a gas truck. I was going to haul gas. And I was almost on the verge of that, and then this opportunity came along to go in with a partner and buy this little business out at Dunmore. It consisted of a small grocery store, the post office. It had its own natural gas well, which supplied the village around it, and a bulk gas station. So the two of us decided it was pretty good go, and that's what we bought and started operating. And the partnership didn't work out very good. And I finally bought out my partner. I bought his share and took it over and kept it for myself. And I just kept that station over the years. I was there for pretty near 40 years. I lived in Dunmore for 47 years after the war, and I forget the exact dates, but...
What was the name of your...
Well, it started out with the Dunmore Cash Store, and I never did like that name because it was anything but a cash store. We put out credit to, especially on that gas business. But eventually they moved the highway, and I was forced to either rebuild or go out of business because the highway had moved.
It used to run through Dunmore.
It used to run right through, and then it went behind.
Yeah.
And I had to build over on the highway. I had land there. So I went into Hawk for the second time. This is in 1952. And I went into Hawk to the oil company, and they built a service station for me.
And then you operated that for around 2 years.
That, yeah. But it went up and down too. It had for a while, I was the only service station on the highway between Medicine Hat and Maple Creek. All of a sudden, there's a service station on every corner. You know, and that cut back on my business. I was, up until then, I thought I could drop the bulk part of my business, bulk gas part, and just retail the gas, but it didn't last long, and there were so many service stations around that cut the business way down. That I got into the, had some land, and I fell into the tractor parts business. Thing I fell in, a guy owed me $80, and he said he'd give me his tractor for it. And I was in the tractor business. So things went on, and as they changed, you had to change with it. That's the only thing.
And you got married?
I got married, and I raised 6 kids out there. Got married. But always considered Medicine Hat as being
your base.
Our base, our town. Yeah.
Now, how long ago did you retire? You're 97 now. How many years have you been retired?
Well, I would say 27 at least, from the time I was 70.
Yeah.
I drove, finally, I drove school bus for quite a few years. And then I was between 65 and 70. And I still owned the school bus, but I hired a driver. And I was responsible for it, and that for 2 or 3 years, and eventually I sold it. But I had kept 3 acres of land out at Dunmore, and I'd built a house on that. The second house I'd built, the first house I'd built on Army, what is it?
Post-war, the veterans.
Under the Veterans Land Act. VLA. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, my dad. We lived up on 10th Street in the wartime houses for years. Yeah, and
your dad's built his own house, didn't he?
Eventually, yes, he did build a house again on 10th Street.
Yeah.
But we were in a wartime house.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, on 167, and we moved to 391 10th Street.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 167.
Were you involved with the military after you got out? Did you come back or join the South Alberta Regiment or anything?
I didn't. I was
too busy.
Too busy, I think. Too busy raising a family and.
Yep. But since then, since you retired, you've been involved with the Legion quite a bit, haven't you?
Well, I was getting involved, and then I more or less dropped. I've always kept my membership up, and I lost the train of thought here.
But you have a lot of good friends that are down the Legion.
Well, yes, I have. I had a lot of friends, and they were still, even after I moved into Medicine Hat, there was quite a few guys around, but that were buddies back from the Calgary Highlanders, mostly because the 5th Division had fellows from the Eastern Canada. Like the 17th Field Regiment was out of Toronto. And
so you didn't have many of the guys that you served with around here?
No.
At least in the 5th Division?
No, there weren't many. It was mostly from the, still from the Calgary Highlanders, Zeke Zeiser and,
So you established your relationship there. Roy, I would like to thank you for coming in and giving us a wee bit about your life. You've had a full life, and I just hope that when I reach 97, if I reach that ripe old age, that I'm as sharp as you are.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you coming in and joining us. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Stories of Alberta Military History. I would like to thank my co-host Ian Parkinson and the South Alberta Light Horse for hosting us here in the Officers NCO's mess of the Lieutenant Colonel M.E. Patterson Armory in Medicine Hat. Thank you.